What's up, guys? This is Heiss, and we're coming back at you guys once again from the Colorado Railroad Museum here in the shops in stall 1 and stall 2. And recently on the channel, I had a pretty good question that made me think of a question that I had when I was a kid too. And it was on a video of the 491. And the question was, where are the wheels? Well, it's less obvious than you'd think, because when you look on the outside where you'd expect to see wheels, you've got all these big counterweights. You don't actually have wheels there, and when we take a look on the inside, you can see that the wheels are actually inside the frame. These are the main frame rails that actually holds the whole locomotive together, runs all the way to the front to the cylinders and all the way back past the cab. And normally, when you think of a steam locomotive, you don't think of something that looks like that. You're normally thinking something that looks a lot more like your Grand Southern number 20 right here. 20 is a much more conventional looking locomotive because it's inside frame, where the frame is inside the wheels, so you see the rods and the wheels and everything like you'd expect on the outside. And almost every steam locomotive out there is more like this one. So why did they choose to do outside frame for 491? Well, the answer lies in needing to have a lot of power in a pretty compact package. These locomotives here are both 3-foot narrow gauge, so they run on smaller gauge track than normal. And as such, the clearances are also a little bit smaller in some dimensions on the railroad as the railroad goes around. And so the locomotives needed to be relatively small, but they still needed to pull a lot of freight. And so while they started with designs like the 20 and other locomotives, they ended up realizing that they could sink a bigger boiler further down to meet all the vertical clearances if they moved the frames out. Let me show you what I mean. Editor Heiss here. I was thinking about this on the way home from the museum and realized it's more so a thing about center of mass than it is about physical clearances, as there's not too many overhead clearances on the narrow gauge. The actual issue is trying to keep all the weight down low. You've only got such a small footprint that you can actually transmit weight on with 3-foot gauge track. And so keeping the center of mass nice and low by having the big boiler nice and down low was going to make sure that this really wide locomotive could negotiate the track without too many issues of tipping or any side loads concerning like that. Look at how wide the 491 is compared to the rails. If it was much taller, it would be pretty waddly. Back here is Denver and Rio Grande Western number 346. 346 is in the midst of a big overhaul, but 346 shows off the point pretty well. When you've got a normal size boiler and an inside frame, you need a lot of space above the frame for all the suspension components that help keep the wheels and frame talking to each other nicely. And as such, it's actually pretty common for a lot of these engines to get big patches right there, because the springs actually ended up coming up and hitting the boiler on these small narrow gauge packages. And so if you made the boiler bigger, either the engine was going to get considerably taller, like a lot of standard gauge engines, or you're going to run into even more problems there. And so what they did was move the frame on the outside. By putting the frame on the outside, they're moving it considerably farther on center. The frame would have been almost a foot inwards on either side, and now we've got all this space, and so the actual bottom of the boiler sits below the tops of these springs and spring hangers. So we can have all these big suspension components on our frame and further outside so that we can keep the overall package relatively small, but have all of the power that comes with a large locomotive there. This design was pretty common for the Denver and Rio Grande Western and many other railroads. A lot of narrow gauge railroads ended up using outside frame locomotives of various different types. You can see a lot of different examples out there, but the Colorado ones tend to be pretty well known because tourist railroads like the Durango and Silverton and the Cumbres and Toltec have famously operated cousins of the 491, the K36s, and the K28s, which all kind of share this same design feature. And so as such, you end up with a really wide locomotive in terms of cylinders. One fun fact that I've recently learned is that 491 is apparently wider than the big boy is, but just not near as tall. So that's the fun little piece of it here. So the cylinders get really, really wide compared to an inside frame. Let's take a look at 20. You can see how much narrower the cylinders are. And then to make sure that all the motion of all these different rods is counterbalanced, we got all these different counterweights on the outside of the locomotive. And they're also sized for the different weight that you can see. So the number 4 driver right here has just one connecting rod, and so it's relatively small. The number 3 right here has got the main rod and it's got 2 connecting rods, so it's got this extra padded out portion that the number 4 doesn't have. And it's actually even bigger than the number 4 and the number 2, but that's a little harder to see. As well, the number 3 is cross-balanced, as we saw a little bit earlier. There's also counterweights on the wheels, but on the rest of the K37's wheels, there aren't any counterweights. We take a look at this wheel set. This is the number 1. There's actually no counterweight on the wheel at all on the inside there, which is actually quite interesting to see. It's not often you see a steam locomotive wheel without one of the defining counterweights. Every other steam locomotive out there that's inside frame ends up having them on every wheel. Some outside frame engines did have more counterweights on the wheels. The K28 actually has them on every wheel, if my memory's serving right. But it's a really unique design choice that allowed the narrow gauge to have a lot of power in a relatively small package still, although 491, when you see it in person, is quite an impressive locomotive, as well as all the K36s and the other locomotives on the Grand were. Anyways, guys, I hope you liked this little look and explanation at an outside framed locomotive. If you liked it, let me know in the comments down below. If you have any other questions, as always, let me know and we'll try and get a little bit of a dive going in. Don't worry, sometime soon we're going to talk about this thing behind me here. Thanks for watching.